In Ekurhuleni today. Our colleague Samkele Maseko is watching that story for us, and he'll bring us detail in a bit, accompanied by the Premier of Gauteng, of course a senior official within the ANC Gauteng component, David Makura.
Thank you very much, comrades. We may be seated. What I'm going to do is not difficult at all. I'm requested to introduce the president. Actually, I'm not introducing him. I'm just calling him to come and speak to the domestic workers. So please. We are honored, comrades, to have the president of the ANC, who is the president of the Republic, to honor us. And I know Uguti I've twisted, so his time is really limited with us, but we appreciate the fact that, President, you were able to, with your team, be able to see it very, very important for you to come and pay respect to the domestic workers as we gather here today, honoring them. City serve the server. Today we are serving them because they have spent all their lives serving us. This is the President of the African National Congress, the President of the Republic of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was elected in the ANC conference in Nazareth, who is on the implementation of the important decision of the African National Congress to unite the ANC and to unite the people of this country, to renew our movement and to give South Africans a better life for all, better communities. I'm calling upon, without wasting any time, President Cyril Ramaphosa to come and speak to the domestic workers. Mongameli.
Amanda. Viva Cosatu, viva. Viva. Viva Cosatu, viva. Viva. Program Director, President of COSATU, Comrade Zingi Shalosi, Second Deputy President of COSATU, Comrade Louisa Tipe, General Secretary of SABC, Comrade Myrtle Bedboy, the Secretary General of the ANC Women's League, the other leaders of the ANC Women's League who are here, the chairperson of the ANC in the Gauteng province, who is here, the executive mayor of Ekurhuleni, who is also here, and the executive director of Above Normal, my good friend Masingita, representatives of the International Labour Organization, and representatives of the Department of Labour, and employment and domestic workers of our country and comrades and friends. The lady who tells me she owns this place greeted me earlier and said to me she's a product of a domestic worker. And I told her that my mother was also a domestic worker. So I feel at home. I am really truly honored to address you on this, what I would regard as a historic occasion when we observe the anniversary of the ILO Convention 189 on domestic work, or decent work rather, for domestic workers. Because this gives us an opportunity to reflect on the progress that we have made since we in South Africa ratified the convention in 2013, and just as importantly, the progress that we have made since becoming a democracy in 1994. This is also an occasion to consider what I would say are the challenges that domestic workers in our country continue to face, and the work that we still need to do to improve their working as well as their living conditions. Now, as we are gathered here, we have to acknowledge but also celebrate the domestic workers of South Africa. And it is important that we acknowledge, recognize, and celebrate these very important people who do work day in and day out in our country. The contribution of domestic workers to our society and also our economy is immense. And it is a contribution that many of us may never realize, but it is a mammoth contribution. In homes across the country, around 1 million, and repeat, 1 million domestic workers and more carry out essential household tasks: cooking, cleaning, caring for various people in various households, looking after children, caring for the sick, caring for the elderly. That is the work that they do. And it is important that we applaud these very important people who do this type of work. For as they do this work, they keep the social fabric of our country together. They are the glue, they are the strings that tie the social fabric of our country together. They are the ones who make society intact to function at a variety of levels. Because through their work, they contribute both directly as well as indirectly to the growth and the sustainability of our families, of our households, of our communities, but also importantly of our economy. It is an economy that would never function without the contribution of domestic workers. And if you like, they are the real engine that makes our society to function, that makes our economy to function. And let's applaud them for that as well. But the problem is, this contribution that they make that domestic workers make in our country largely remains unrecognized, unappreciated, and in many ways unseen, because we don't see them in our faces. They work in households and they are removed from the front line of society's activities. Their contribution is not reflected in the wages that they are paid, in the conditions under which they often have to work, nor in the many ways that society recognizes achievement. We never even have awards ceremonies. We never even have recognition, even at a national level, for these important people who contribute to the life of our society. Now, in my view, this is a great injustice, and it has its roots in our apartheid past, where domestic work was one of the few occupations available to black women, where conditions were particularly exploitative and where abuse was common. Domestic work was one area where the triple oppression of black working class women was most evident and the most severe. Even after 27 years of democracy, and this is despite the progress that we have made, we still have not overcome this very sad past. We have still not provided domestic workers with the lives that they desire and the lives that they deserve, as well as the recognition that is due to them as the real engines, the real people who contribute to the building of families, of societies, as well as communities. In part, this is because of the persistence of many of the inequalities in our society, between black and white, between men and women, and between urban and rural as well. It is in part due to the continuation of poverty in our society, particularly among African women. And it is also because of the widespread unemployment problem that our country experiences. It is also in part due to the nature of domestic work. Across the world, domestic workers face many of the same challenges. Many are not in formal employment, and many find that they are not even registered as employees and therefore are not seen as contributors to the economy. As a result, their legal rights as employees are not respected, they are not recognized, their hours of work and other conditions of employment are also not regulated. Those domestic workers who are not in formal employment also do not have access to benefits such as unemployment insurance, workplace injury compensation, or even social protection that other employees in industry may have. Domestic workers are less likely to be unionized, and that is why the existence of this union is such a major milestone. For years, the existence of SABMAU is such a major achievement. For years, federations have sought to organize domestic workers successfully. and have not been really that successful because domestic workers don't operate in an industrial setting. There are not many in a factory or in a mine, and therefore even the decision by a domestic worker to join a union is a huge, huge effort. And that is why I applaud you all for having joined this union. And because of those challenges and difficulties, they are less likely to be aware of their rights because they operate singularly in the home of their employers. They are less likely to organize and mobilize to protect the rights that they should have, and have less of an opportunity to have their grievances addressed. Now, live-in domestic workers are particularly vulnerable, much more vulnerable than those who live outside. They are vulnerable to abuse, they are vulnerable to exploitation, and the abuse can include physical abuse. It can also include sexual harassment. And they are also vulnerable to the limits that may be imposed on their right to access to their own families or children. The struggle to improve the material conditions of domestic workers cannot be separated from the broader struggle for the economic empowerment of the women of our country. And that is why I'm so particularly pleased that the Secretary General of the ANC Women's League is here. Because leaders of the ANC Women's League, like Comrade Miogo and others who are also here, have placed the empowerment of women on the top of the agenda of our nation. Many women are forced to accept exploitative conditions as domestic workers because of the lack of other opportunities for employment or income generation. If we create more economic opportunities for women, we put greater pressure on employers to improve the wages and conditions of domestic workers. It was a particularly joyous moment when we went around the country and finally got the minimum wage accepted for workers in our country. Much as the wage for domestic workers was pegged at a lower level, I am certain that in a few years it will catch up with the minimum wage that should be paid to all other workers. The great achievement was to have a minimum wage to be applicable to domestic workers as well. And whether employers like it or not, the minimum wage must be paid. And if we improve the wages and conditions of employment of domestic workers, we improve the economic position of hundreds of thousands of women in South Africa. We improve food security in their households. We improve their health and educational outcomes for their children. And we lift more and more people out of poverty. As we confront the legacy of our past, we must also deal with the devastating impact of COVID-19. Statistics South Africa shows that there was a 26% decline in employment amongst domestic workers between the first and the second quarters of 2020. So domestic workers did suffer a devastating blow out of COVID-19, because suddenly they were just told by their employers, and one kept hearing those type of stories, that sorry, we can no longer keep you as an employee. And it could have been for a variety of reasons. Some of them could have been, really dubious reasons, that you will infect us with COVID-19, so go. And some would have been, no, we can no longer afford you. This means that there were 250,000 fewer domestic workers in employment after the first 3 months of COVID-19. While there has been some recovery, we have not yet returned to pre-COVID-19 employment levels. This has created great hardships for families across the country, worsening the living conditions of some of the most vulnerable and marginalized workers. It is therefore essential that we accelerate the recovery of our economy, but that we should also accelerate the creation of jobs. It also means that we need to continue to provide support to those most affected by the pandemic. Now, faced with these challenges and faced with the legacy of our apartheid past, we must acknowledge that we have indeed made progress since the advent of democracy and since the ratification of the ILO Convention 189. Working together, we have done much to improve the employment conditions, and we have also done quite a lot to advance the rights of domestic workers in our country. Measures that the ANC government has implemented include the sectoral determination for domestic workers, which was introduced in 2002 under the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and which sets out comprehensive standards and protection for domestic workers. And here I must applaud and congratulate COSATU for having advocated the rights of workers. And this Comrade President Zingilosi shows the benefit of being in alliance with the African National Congress. That's where the benefit comes in. If COSATU was not in alliance with the African National Congress, you would have found it a lot harder to win all these rights for workers. And it was you as COSATU who continued to insist that the African National Congress must have a bias towards working people in our country. And this is the result of that bias, and it's a positive bias. So I congratulate you. Now, some of the benefits have included, yes, improving in working conditions, improving hours of work, overtime pay, leave entitlements, and daily and weekly rest periods. Now, those rights are there, and they need to be implemented. The introduction, as I said earlier, of the national minimum wage was a victory for all workers of our country and gave effect to a demand made more than 50 years ago when the Freedom Charter was adopted. By improving the wages of the lowest paid workers, the national minimum wage contributes to reducing the high levels of poverty and income inequality as well. At the time that we introduced the national minimum wage, we recognized that domestic workers and farm workers are particularly vulnerable to disemployment. Together with our social partners at NEDLAC, we therefore established, yes, as I said, a slightly lower minimum for these workers, but with time, over time, this is going to catch up. The national minimum wage for domestic workers has since been increased to 88% of the national minimum wage this year, and is expected to be aligned with the general minimum wage, as I said, in 2022. And that in itself will be another great victory for domestic workers, much as it will take a little bit of time. Since February this year, domestic workers can now qualify for benefits under the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act. That's important. So if you slip on a piece of soap in the kitchen and you get injured, and even if you cut yourself on your little finger with a knife, you can get covered. So that's what you should remember. This means that domestic workers who are injured can claim from the compensation fund, and the dependents of a domestic worker who died as a result of injuries incurred while on duty will also be able to claim. It is also mandatory for employers of domestic workers and employees to contribute to the Unemployment Insurance Fund. Full-time domestic workers can also claim UIF payments in cases of long-term or temporary inability to work due to illness, maternity leave, adoption, and also unemployment. Now, another significant development is the approval by Parliament of the ILO Convention 190 on the elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work. Now, that was an important one. Now, we anticipate that the instrument of ratification will soon be deposited with the ILO, and I'm glad that there's a representative of the ILO here today. Yes, the enforcement of labor regulations and minimum wages is the mandate of the Department of Employment and Labor, and domestic workers have the same rights as other workers to lodge complaints. The department conducts inspections proactively and on the basis of complaints at workplaces to ensure that employers comply with all labor legislation. Now, of course, COSATU leaders always complain that we don't have enough inspectors, which is true. But the day will come when inspectors will be able to knock on every door, on many doors of households in our country, to go and inspect how domestic workers are treated. The day will come. Yet, despite the legal protection that domestic workers in South Africa have, we know that many abuses still occur and many laws are ignored by employers. Due to the nature and location of domestic work, because of the way the work is done, and the location in houses, many of which are hidden behind high walls, regulations are often difficult to enforce. Government needs to strengthen its inspection and enforcement capabilities, and we need to improve the resourcing and efficiency of bodies such as the CCMA, UIF, and the Compensation Fund. But we also need to work together to increase awareness both amongst domestic workers themselves and their employers of the laws and regulations regulating domestic work. And we need to intensify our efforts to organize domestic workers into trade unions and to make sure that their voices are heard and their concerns are addressed. In 4 days' time, on Monday, on the 1st, we all know what is going to happen. And if you don't know what is going to happen, I ask you to go to the chair of the ANC, Comrade Makura, to go to the mayor of Ekurhuleni, Comrade Masina. They will tell you what's going to happen. This is an opportunity for domestic workers to also make their voices heard. It is an opportunity to choose representatives that have the interests of workers at heart. Representatives who are going to show that they are committed to improving the lives of domestic workers where they live. Representatives who will do everything within their means to make sure that there is service delivery, who are committed to building safer, cleaner, and better communities. This is an opportunity for domestic workers to recognize the great advances that have been made under the leadership of the African National Congress and to demonstrate that they expect the ANC to do more and to do better in improving the conditions under which our people live. And to do what Comrade Zingi Losi was saying, to unite the people of South Africa and to renew the African National Congress so that the ANC can fulfill its historic mission, a mission it was given in 1912 when it was formed. So I urge all domestic workers throughout the country to use this vote to change their lives and to change the country for the better. As a society, we need to give domestic workers the recognition that they deserve, a recognition that is due to them. We need to ensure that their rights are protected, are upheld, and that the conditions of employment that they work under are improved and that they receive decent wages. As a society, we have to build on the progress that has been made for the conditions of workers since 1994. We must intensify the struggle that has brought us this far, and we must not rest until we have made decent work a reality for each and every domestic worker in our country. Working together, I am absolutely certain that we can succeed. And for me, this is a great occasion, an occasion that recognizes the importance of domestic workers in our country, in our society, but more importantly, of advocating the idea and concept of decent work for domestic workers, something that we must achieve. And I believe that the more we talk about it, even those who either exploit domestic workers, pay them wages that are way below the minimum wage, the message will sink in that the time for domestic workers has arrived and they must be treated decently and they must be paid properly. Thank you very much. I would like to call on
Right, let's take you back to Action SA now.